What do you think is
Good morning and blessings to everybody who's joining us via the live stream. We're going to be picking up in a new book today. I decided after some much thought and prayer that I keep talking about Ezekiel and I've never taught a class on him, at least here. So I was like, you know what, if I'm going to keep talking about him, I probably should teach about him so that people actually know what I'm talking about. So we're going to start off with Ezekiel. And I'm going to forewarn people. There's going to be Sunday after Sunday after Sunday here in a bit of where you're going to maybe feel a little overwhelmed because the judgment portions of the prophet are extensive. And they, as I've described it before, are rather hardcore. And so I'm going to just forewarn people that that's going to be happening. So I can remember the last time I actually taught this class. And as we go through here, you'll start to see that because the titles will be going along the lines, and still more judgment. And we're doing some more judging. But Ezekiel is the prophet who I'd like to talk about, as this is the guy you can tell that people have never read when they say only God can judge me. Because there are absolutely no holds barred. And which isn't to say that the other prophets, kind of skirt around the bush. They get in there too, but you start to see the violence of God's judgment, and its unfettered strictness in Ezekiel. But just forewarning everybody. But at the same time, this it's like you read Walther's book on the proper distinction of law and gospel, where Walther is telling his students, preach the law in all its harshness so that the gospel sounds all the more sweeter, because Ezekiel's gospel prophecies are pretty sweet. So just a little forewarning. And since we're talking about Ezekiel, I think it behooves us to actually ask, who is Ezekiel? Ezekiel is a member of one of the priestly families. We think he may be a Levite. We're not 100% certain because he doesn't really give family history. But we know he's associated with the temple. And particularly with the priests of the temple. We also know he's kind of a young man. I drew a blank where I was going. Especially as I look at my notes, I haven't gotten to the part where I talk about his age. But we do know that he was a part of the priestly families. And some of this really shows in his distress and lament over the destruction of the temple. It'll be interesting to note as we go through Ezekiel's book here that his tone changes when he finds out about the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. As it was like he's building up for this, and then it happens, and it becomes something of a lament, and we start to see that switch towards the proclamation of redemption. But one of the things that we can say about Ezekiel is he does because he is part of the priestly family, and from the way he writes, is that he does appear to be educated. He does. So, as a part of the priestly family, if they were taking seriously their duties, I mean, he would have learned to read, he would have learned to write, would have studied theology, and the like, and it'll show in his writings. One of the things we know, some of what we know actually comes from Josephus. If you've listened to Dr. Paul Meyer, we owe a lot of things that we know about the history of Israel to Josephus, as he was a very prolific writer and put down many of the oral historic traditions of the Jewish people. And one of the things that he wrote about Ezekiel is that he was the first to write. We're not actually sure what that means. But we think it means that he was the first to write down his own oracles. For those of you who don't know, it's been long thought that the oracles of most of the other prophets were written down by somebody who was listening to the prophet. Although we still refer to them as the writing prophets.
Where does Ezekiel fall with Isaiah?
He falls after Isaiah. He's actually a contemporary of Jeremiah and Daniel. In fact, I think there's indications, I'm trying to remember if I'm remembering correctly, that Ezekiel indicates he knows Daniel. Because both Daniel and Ezekiel are going to be the prophets to the people in exile. Daniel, of course, ends up serving else living. And he does indicate, when he's responding to the news of Jerusalem falling, I believe he does indicate of hearing from the prophet Jeremiah. As Jeremiah would send word to the exiles that Jerusalem had finally fallen and Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed the temple and Jerusalem. So,
I'm not going to have to say that name.
What? No, you don't have to say Nebuchadnezzar today.
Okay.
Don't feel bad. One of my favorite Veggie Tales, which is just as goofy as I'll get out, is the tale of Rack, Shack, and Benny. Because the vegetables cannot pronounce Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they kept referring to Nebuchadnezzar as King Nezi. So don't feel too bad, Susie.
I'm going to say never.
All right, Pastor, how do you say the name?
Yeah.
Of course, Ruth puts me on the spot yesterday.
Yeah.
I pronounce some of those words, and I go, "Yeah, your guess is as good as mine."
Yeah. Technically, that's on me because I said that you picked up your Greek.
I can read it. I can't speak it. So, yeah.
You wouldn't have done it if you checked with me first. So I said that you were.
It was okay. It was fine. Yeah, I never did great. I was so glad we didn't have to actually speak it in class because pronunciation is not my friend. I struggle with English, so. But so anyhow, so Ezekiel, he is a contemporary of Jeremiah and Daniel. So they're going to be doing their thing at the same time as he is. I think there may have been a couple more that were pretty close, but Isaiah was actually well before. I think it was 200 years before.
Because he was the fall of the northern kingdom.
Yeah, he was fall of Northern Kingdom. And because he actually had a good king. As the king repented, and the Syrian army. I can try getting the right invaders here because there was a whole series.
Well, the Syrians were the ones that took out the northern.
Was surrounding Jerusalem and laying siege, and when Josiah repented, the Assyrian army was defeated.
It was Hezekiah.
It was Hezekiah. Thank you, Hezekiah. I'm sorry.
And it was the Assyrians.
Okay, at least I got part of it right. Hezekiah repented, and the army was defeated. Ezekiel didn't have that luxury. He got some of the bad kings. That does seem to be kind of Israel's history, where they'll have a series of bad kings, and then they'll have a good king, and then they'll have some more bad kings. And a lot of them had similar names. You think Elisha and Elijah are bad. Wait till you get to the kings. In fact, I'm actually looking at my notes the other night just reviewing this because I put this Bible study together years ago. Going, okay, did I mistype this or not?
I was thinking, poor Hezekiah, I mean, he was a good king, but his son was one of the most wicked kings, although he repented on his deathbed, which is more than you could say for a lot of them.
Josiah was a good king too.
Yes.
Yeah. He was the one who tore his clothes when they discovered the book of the law and discovered they've been doing things wrong, and he'd been trying to do things right.
Isaac was one of the last of the kings.
Yeah.
Because he was a good king, God delayed the invasion until after his time.
Yep. And Ezekiel, I'll just cover this last bit here. Apparently, he was called to be prophet years into the exile. So some of what he's actually prophesying is an explanation of what's going on and answering some of the questions. Because you know how a disaster happens and people start asking, why did God let this happen? Well, that kind of thing starts to happen. It's an age-old story. And sometimes it can be considered, well, who's actually being punished? Are the people in exile the sinners? Are the people who left in Jerusalem, are they the sinners? The people who died, are they among the? And one of the things that Ezekiel is going to answer for us is, you can't tell. He describes it in a visceral way that when the sword cuts down the forest, it does not distinguish between the good and the bad tree. So in other words, he's telling, don't even try to guess the people of Israel and who was out. But anyhow, he gets his call about 5 years into the exile. And Ezekiel's an interesting book. And he writes in a very apocalyptic style. So you get the fantastic visions that you have in Revelation also appear frequently in Ezekiel. So like on Thursday, we were talking about the really freaky angels with the eyes all over their head, all over, and how just absolutely creepy that was. Well, Ezekiel's not much better. In fact, my prof who was teaching Ezekiel would tell us that, Ezekiel was really popular in the 60s because people associated it with a bad acid trip. Because of the absolutely fantastical descriptions that he's going to have of some of these visions. But it's also because of the fantastical nature of these visions and some of the things that he gets into. Jewish tradition is that nobody could read it before the age of 30. Because it was thought if you tried to read it before age 30, it would melt your brain.
Too dangerous for the young?
Yeah, it was too dangerous for the young. And 30 was the age at which they considered men to be mature men. So, if you notice, one of the places that shows up is Jesus began his ministry at age 30. And prior to that point, he's probably just doing whatever dad was doing. Excuse me, adoptive dad was doing. And to take on priestly duties, one had to be 30. To be considered eligible for teaching, one had to be 30. And so along those lines, they thought if anybody who was not mature enough read the book of Ezekiel, it would melt their brain. So it's always fun to tell kids that one and then have them read Ezekiel.
Ignoring the wisdom of your elders there.
Yep. So there's some history and how people would read the book of Ezekiel. Now, continuing on in our discussion of history. Oh, good, you fixed the slide. As I'm looking at my own slide, and it's running off the slide. I don't know what happened here.
Right, I don't either. When I was making this, your slides were fine, just a little small to put out there.
Well, yeah, now my slide's like running off. I can't see all my notes. So I'm going to have to use your slides for my own notes. Now, he does mention, he talks about the 30th year, and we think that's referring to the fact that Ezekiel is 30. So if you're thinking old gray-haired man for Ezekiel, no. Unless he was like me and started going gray early. Because I was definitely going gray by about age 30.
That's not a bad thing. It's wisdom.
Yeah, at least according to Scripture, it's a sign of wisdom. Personally, I kind of wish I hadn't been so wisdomous early in my life. As I started finding gray hairs at age 27. Yeah, I blame that one on Julie because that was around the time we got married. That I am glad. Grandpa Boyer had a full head of hair on the day he died. So I'm pretty confident I'm going to keep my hair. Don't know about Grandpa Bowman. He died when my dad was little. But anyhow, so we believe that Ezekiel is writing around age 30. So that'd be around. So this and one of the things though that it meant is it was kind of a tumultuous time period, particularly for Israel. Because anybody and everybody who had any aspirations were going to go right through Israel. I've talked about it before, but I'll say it again. This has played into their history somewhat. The geography of the region is such that if you want to go to Africa from Asia, you got to go through Israel. If you want to get from Egypt or in Africa up to the Asian countries, you have to go through Israel. You could try going around it, but you're going to go through a very deserty, arid, not so great wilderness.
Like your Mediterranean.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why you have some major ports in Israel, but also it's a major trade crossroads. And with the way the mountains and the valleys are formed, it meant the roads largely ran through Israel. Because, like, if you head out onto the Arabian Peninsula, you start getting into that sea of sand that's out that way, and that's not really good for travel. And people being people actually like to pick the pretty routes, because usually the pretty routes also tend to be the better routes for supplies. I kind of look at it this way. It's similar to when I was having to travel between Abilene and St. Louis all the time back when I was at seminary. I went what was technically a longer route because I had more options to stop at if I went that route. I absolutely detested taking the turnpike all the way across Oklahoma down to Wichita Falls, because once I got past Oklahoma City, there was like nothing. There was Lawton, that was it. And after having car troubles a couple of times, I was like, yep, you know what? I'm just going to go down 75. Yeah, it's going to take me a little bit longer. Sure, I got to cut through Dallas. Well, sort of ish. No, actually, it wasn't Dallas, it'd be Fort Worth, because I take 35 West. But it also meant that about every 15 to 30 minutes, I was going through a town. And so if things happened, I had a good chance of being able to. I did not want to get caught like I did one time where I got a flat on the turnpike. And only just managed to find somebody in the Lawton area. But it took me forever to get there because I was trying to drive on that donut. And the first place I'd stopped, the guy at the tire place just walked right by me. Locked his door and walked right by. I was like, oh well.
It was closed.
Yeah, he was closed. And I guess he had some place to get to. But it's that kind of idea, though, that you take a certain route because it provides for better amenities. Well, when you're traveling in those days, you got to be able to stop and resupply, and you're going to have better chances resupplying going through Israel than you are going around on the other side of the mountains. And, well, you know how countries and kings can be. They got to show that they're the biggest and baddest around. Who is the historical power in the region? The historic power in the region. Egypt. So if you wanted to prove you were the biggest and baddest around, who were you going to go try and beat up? Egypt. Who was in the way of getting to Egypt? Israel, yeah. And one of the things that you note if you read through the historic books and also some of the prophets, the kings of the northern and southern kingdom would try to play these superpowers off of each other to try and protect their small little country, who happened to be in the way. It didn't work out in their favor. As God said, I see what you're doing. It's going to fail. I'll make sure of it.
Right, seeking allies from pagan kings instead of God.
Yep. So it's during this time that and Judah would, in particular, would find itself between several world powers that were trying to fight it out. And so you're going to have invasions from Assyria, even Egypt, and then eventually Babylon. Now, Assyria would conquer the northern kingdom. If you don't remember, soon after the death of Solomon, the sons of David decided they didn't like playing nice with each other and all wanted to be king, and so they split the country into two, with the northern kingdom going one way and the tribe of Judah and Benjamin going another way. So you'll usually see them referred to in the prophets as Israel and Judah, with Israel being the northern kingdom, Judah being the southern kingdom. Which is one of the reasons why, if you're reading in the Psalms and whatnot, you'll see the psalm refer to both Israel and Judah and parallel to each other. So, and by this time that Ezekiel was writing, Israel had fallen a long time ago. It was a province of Assyria. The Assyrians had sent the people of the northern kingdom into exile. They'd sent in their own people. So this is how you end up with like the Decapolis and the like in Jesus' time, because the Assyrians put their favorite people in these nice valleys and whatnot.
I was thinking, did the Assyrian Empire have the policy of just uprooting a whole group of people and depositing them somewhere else in the empire and bringing another group of people, depositing them in so nobody could be feeling like they're going to fight for their, homeland because, well, you got uprooted and back from their homeland?
There was a lot of that going on. And the Babylonians did so. That's the reason why they took all the best and brightest from Jerusalem, that they were going to educate them in the ways of Babylon, so they'd have all these young Judeans who were basically Babylonians.
That seems like a slightly kinder way, in the sense that you're saying, hey, play nice, and you get to meet somebody in this kingdom too.
Yeah.
Also, don't play nice, be a hostage, I guess.
Yep, exactly. And Judah was finding themselves in a tight spot, as Egypt and Assyria were allies at the time. In fact, the reason Josiah died is because he was attempting to stop Egypt from helping Assyria. So, yeah, God didn't really take kindly to the fact the Israelites kept trying to go back to the people that held them in slavery. And Josiah was actually trying to do the right thing. And so this is a case of dying to do the right thing. But then Nebuchadnezzar comes along, and he did the whole Alexander thing. He came, he saw, he conquered. And so he ends up defeating Egypt almost over again. I've forgotten. His father had also beat Egypt, but hadn't stuck around. And so Nebuchadnezzar came back through. Nebuchadnezzar kind of had a thing of doing that, where he'd go beat somebody and leave, and then come back and beat them again. But anyhow, now we can get into some fun. Go into the next slide there, Julie. The slide where I'm sitting there staring. Did I spell things wrong?
Yeah.
As we have Jehoiakim and Jehoiachin, which, depending on which English pronunciation you're using, could sound the same. So Jehoiakim was a vassal under Nebuchadnezzar. He had basically what happened. He surrendered Judah to Babylon on the provision that he'd be kept alive and would rule under Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, that worked right up until the time that Jehoiakim decided he was going to go ahead and rebel. Yeah, don't trust the king you just beat to be content to be the beaten king.
Nebuchadnezzar did, he's a lot all right.
Yeah. And then Jehoiakim, he eventually surrenders Jerusalem to Babylon. And he's going to be sent into exile. Nebuchadnezzar, you could say, learned his lesson. He's like, all right, so you're going to surrender to me? On provision I don't kill you? Okay, well, I'm not going to leave you here so that you can cause more trouble. You're going to be my guest in Babylon.
I suppose from Nebuchadnezzar's perspective, that it's nice to not have to replace a whole existing government. You don't have to.
Yep. Yeah. If you don't have to replace the whole government, it can make things a little easier. Building up bureaucracy and governments from the ground up is not easy. Just ask our country. Because we even started with something in place, and boy, the first few decades as the United States were kind of rough. And it's likely that Ezekiel was part of the group that was taken off at this time. As being a member of the priestly family, he'd be considered part of the nobility, the upper crust of Judah. And so they hauled him off, and it's 5 years later that we start to get to Ezekiel's prophecies. And as we get into his prophecies, one of the things we're going to find is Ezekiel is full of paradoxes. I swear he read like... Oh, because he did a whole series of prophecies that were mimed. He didn't speak. He had like one prophecy where he built a model of the city of Jerusalem and lay naked beside it and stared at it like he was mad at it.
Like God would.
Yeah, exactly. So he was supposed to lay on his side for so many days, staring at it angrily, and then he was supposed to switch sides and stare at it angrily. There was another where he was supposed to dig through the wall. A whole bunch of prophecies where he doesn't actually really speak. He just does actions. And it's supposed to illustrate various things. Like, as Jimmy was mentioning, God's angry at them. Oh, that's one of the reasons why he's staring at Jerusalem angrily, because he's making it clear God is angry at Jerusalem. He's angry at the people. So, Ezekiel both speaks and doesn't speak, which is part of the reason he is considered such a trippy,
Well, yeah, I understand. A grown man laying naked beside a model.
Yeah.
I mean, what drugs are you on? What mushrooms are you on?
I was like, God got weird with his era of prophets, because Jeremiah had to go bury his underwear.
Are they that bad, huh?
Yeah, I guess so. And Ezekiel's got to go around doing his prophecies without any clothes on.
Yeah.
Maybe.
He's getting somebody's attention, but maybe not in the right way.
Yeah. But anyhow, as we get into his works, we're going to find a bunch of different paradoxes.
Imagine if somebody did that today, how people would react.
Yeah. He'd be arrested is what would happen for indecent exposure.
Right.
God
And
that
all,
divorce his wife. Symbol of God's correction.
Oh, that was Hosea. Hosea, he married a prostitute. Hosea. And even though it works out for him in the end, that had to be rough. All right, so our paradoxes in Ezekiel, we got law and gospel. All right, that one's kind of, that's just the two words of Scripture. So we have also got the paradoxes of saint and sinner, where the same people are going to be described as both. Again, a description of us in the now, where we are saint, redeemed by Christ, but at the same time, we're still Adam's children and sinners. We'll start to get the idea of two kingdoms arising, where God rules both through the earthly kingdoms and through the gospel. Sometimes we refer to that as church and state, not to be confused with the civic understanding of the separation of church and state, just the two hands by which God rules by. And we also, and this is going to be an important one, we have an end times tension of now and not yet. Eschatological, our $20 word for the day, it means the study of end days.
That's what from eschaton?
Yeah, it comes from the eschaton, which is the end. And so we're going to see things play out where there's going to be something that is of a now, something that they would consider contemporary, but that's not going to be its fullest fulfillment. And so, to take as an example, the vision of the new temple. We can see a now fulfillment in the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem when the people end their exile. But it has a not yet in that it's not fully fulfilled. As we are going to learn in Revelation, which we're studying on Thursdays, that is actually a reference to the New Jerusalem that is still to come on the last day. So there's going to be some tension between that. And so we'll see the nation's death and exile, but then we'll see the return as kind of a small resurrection. But even as it's kind of fulfilled in that, there's a greater fulfillment to come. This gets into our other $20 word for today, which is typology. And typology is the understanding that God is going to use types to point to other things. So the types are going to be, they could be men, things, events, and things. That they will stand as a type of what they point to. So King David is considered a type for Jesus in that he's the king, and a king, a prophetic king at that. And so he serves as a type of Jesus, who is the prophetic king and savior. So the scriptures will compare the two, and so there's something that points to the greater fulfillment. Yeah, Julie.
So is a type basically like a symbolic example?
Yeah, kind of a symbolic example. So the return from exile is going to be a type of the resurrection. And so we're going to see all sorts of different things as we get into Ezekiel.
So they kind of function as a real life foreshadowing?
Yeah, real life foreshadowing is a way of looking at it.
Son of Man, David.
Yeah. Son of Man actually is more Ezekiel than Jesus. as one of the things we're going to notice that through the entirety of the book of Ezekiel, God never refers to Ezekiel as Ezekiel. He calls him Son of Man. And then, of course, in the Gospels, one of the things we see Jesus referring to himself as he's speaking in third person is Son of Man. Which is why when I was preaching the other day, a few weeks ago, on Ezekiel, that I was referring to Jesus as the greater Ezekiel. As I was building off of that idea from Son of Man. All right, and really quickly, just a few other paradoxes we're going to see is nearness and otherness, promise and fulfillment, faith and works, individual and community, and particularism and universalism. Particularism refers to this and not that, so this people and not others. Universalism, of course, referring to it's for everyone. Which kind of gets into that question, why isn't everybody saved? Even though the gospel is given to all. Even though Jesus died for all. Which we'll get to learn is just one of those unanswerable questions. And with that, we're going to end because I'm officially out of time. All right. Yeah, I know.